The first panel is basically focused on, let's say, the Commission. But I say basically because it's not that we want to discuss only the Commission, but we want to discuss what happened to the institutional organization of the European Union powers after the Lisbon Treaty, but also after the change and the transformation of the last years within the Euro crisis. You can come, you can, Federico, you can sit over here. Come here, Irene, over here. And so it is a pleasure for me to have here as the main speaker introducing the debate on the Commission, Renaud Dehousse, who is the director of the Center for European Studies at Sciences Po, and one of the most prominent and established scholars on the European Union institution. You know, my students know his own bibliography, let's say, and he is a very perceptive scholar of what happened in the European Union. Then I have another very interesting pleasure for me of other two speakers, which by chance are two students of mine who did their own careers. So Caterina Carta is now at the London School of Economics, and she is specialized, as some of other students of the Lewis who want to do thesis on the European External Action Service. All of them say, but I would like to meet Caterina Carta. Okay, so now Caterina Carta is here and is one of the specialists on the European External Action Service and the diplomatic body of the European Union. And then Catherine Moury, she just got 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, the tenure as assistant professor at the University Nova of Lisbon, and she's a student both of the governmental system in established democracy. She had an important dissertation on coalition government, and also she is a scholar of the organization, the informal organization of the policy making within the European Union. She worked as assistant with Adrien Héritier. Both of them were students of mine when I was professor at the Siena-Trento PhD program in political science. And as you see, if you are a serious student, you have chances to go on in your life. And then we will have Nicola, Lupo, you know very well as one of the discussants with me of this panel, and this professor of constitutional and European law is professor here at the Lewis. He had a very deep, intense experience also as observer, direct observer of the functioning of the parliamentary institution. So he combined one of the aspects that we try to stress here at the Lewis, the theoretical knowledge with the perception of what happened in real life.
It's of course very nice to be here with you, and it's a wonderful opportunity for me to present a recent work of mine which basically addresses the question you raised, namely what's going on within the European Commission, how does it react to the transformations underway in the European political system. Now, there are various ways to address that question, and let's say one of the interests of the research I'm presenting here is that we decided that we would not follow the classical pattern of social scientists who will simply look at what goes on and try to identify structural changes in the way. No, we turned to people within the Commission and we asked them, what is your view on what is going on in the European Union? So what I'm going to present today is the result of a research project that has been conducted over the past 4 years with a number of colleagues in a variety of universities, focusing on, let's say, the morale of the troops in Brussels, which, of course, is a peculiar view. Not everybody will agree with what EU European Commission officials will think, but it's an important fact in its own right. Let me say first a few words about the context, because it is important to understand, let's say, the research question which we are faced with today. What can one say of the last 2 decades in the integration process? There are a number of reasons to suggest that things have become more complex for the European Commission. First, there is overall a characterized decline in support for European integration, and a clear reluctance on the side of the governments of the member countries of the Union to delegate further powers to the Commission. Finally, there is the steady increase in the powers of the European Parliament, which European federalists may welcome as a strengthening of supranationalism in the Union, but for officials, it simply makes their daily life more complex, because they have to account for their deeds, or indeed for their inaction, before members of European Parliament. So these are a number of reasons to think that this is a fairly difficult period for the Commission. And indeed, to anticipate what I will present in a few minutes, it's a view that is largely shared by our respondents, who tell us, yes, indeed, we do think that the EU has been losing ground to the member states' governments and to the European Parliament, and this makes life for us more difficult, even though we may recognize that it's a welcome evolution in its own right. To make things more complex, the Commission as an organization has undergone major structural changes, whom you know well. One is its enlargement. As a result of the enlargement of the European Union, it now, the College of Commissioners comprises 27 members, which is more than has ever been the case in the past, and the status of officials has been revisited in the wake of the scandals that prompted the resignation of the Santerre Commission in 1999. So again, these are, let's say, domestic factors that may have a strong influence over the morale of the troops. We, therefore, put together a multinational team composed of people who had in the past worked on various facets of the Commission, and well, do what scholars do when they want to do research. We launched a large application with, in this case, the Economic and Social Research Council of the United Kingdom, which granted us a fairly substantial amount of money. What is more important is that to carry out a large-scale research project on Commission officials, we needed the support of the Commission itself. So we had to negotiate first with the Secretariat General, then with the office of Mr. Barroso himself, in order to get their green light, because we needed to get the emails of Commission officials and their permission to bombard them with our questionnaires, which, of course, they were not willing to grant immediately. It took us a little while to explain that, no, we were not interested in allegations of, I don't know, bribery, of financial misconduct of officials or what have you, but simply in their reaction to the changes in European governance. So, what did we intend to ask? You have here a list of the main kind of questions we inserted in our questionnaire, which was actually very long. I'm not going to develop the whole of it today. I just want to focus on some specific aspects which are I think, of relevance to our discussion today. But you see that the range of questions we asked was pretty wide. It concerned both the personal career of the people we turn to, their views on the functioning of the Commission as an organization, the way in which they regard it as similar or different from other administrations, and so on and so forth. How did it work in practice? That's important to understand what I will present now. First, we had an online questionnaire that was actually sent to over 4,500 Commission officials, which is a lot. Not all of them responded. We had a response rate of roughly 60%, which was a small deception. We expected to have more. We had requested the support from both the President's office and the Secretariat General precisely in order to elicit a stronger response rate. But one feature of EU officials is that they're often overworked and therefore found it difficult to answer a questionnaire which perhaps, with the benefit of hindsight, I can say, was a bit too longish. If I had to repeat the experience today, I would opt for a shorter questionnaire in the hope that we would get an even better response rate. But still, even with this qualification, we did have an important number of responses which enabled us to do a fairly substantial quantitative analysis of the responses we got from Commission officials. But we did not stop there. We reckoned, I mean, as much as quantitative analysis is fashionable, we reckoned that it was important for us to, let's say, test a number of our findings and explore some of the paradoxes that emerge from the research by talking to a number of Commission officials, and therefore we carried out a long series of, well, actually 2 series of interviews with EU officials in order to precisely be able to compare both the findings of our quantitative analysis and the more qualitative evidence we gathered through interviews. Let me move on to the findings in order to not to waste too much of your time. What I'm going to address now is not the whole set of questions that were asked to those people, but merely their responses relating to one peculiar issue, the one peculiar issue we discussed today, that is to say the role of the Commission in the overall institutional system of the Union. And what we found out was quite interesting, I believe. We found out that first there is in the Commission, it's hardly a surprise, strong support for a fairly classical vision of European integration, in which the Commission is supposed to be the engine of the integration process. At the same time, though the support was strong, it was not unqualified. For instance, one of the questions we asked was, would you want the Commission to become, as is debated nowadays in some circles, a fully fledged government, the government of Europe? And their answer was rather no. We don't think that this is the right evolution for the EU. There was strong support, as you will see in one of the slides I will show later on, for this thesis that the Commission should become the government of Europe. But support was inferior to 50%, which is quite remarkable. I mean, in many academic descriptions of the Commission, the Commission is supposed to behave like a rational bureaucracy, interested in enhancing its powers, without limits, gaining further legislative and budgetary powers and so on and so forth. This is far from clear based on the evidence we have gathered. In contrast, what is clear is that they are not very satisfied with what they have witnessed in the last 20 years, that is to say, growing assertiveness on the side of national governments, which they say is not a good thing. And this is less of a surprise. Per se, this is interesting, but we try to go a little beyond the surface and try to identify, since we know from earlier works on the Commission, in particular the works by Lisbeth Hoge from UNC Chapel Hill, we know that there coexist within the Commission different worldviews and different visions of how it should behave. So we tried to identify how big a support there was for what I defined as a classical vision of European integration. What do I mean by this? Well, you have here the key elements which we have listed in our questions. Support for the community method is equated with a belief that the Commission, rather than the Member States, should be the central players in the Union. And most importantly, that of all, let's say, the prerogatives of the Commission, the one that is most important is its mission as a policy initiator, which is, as you know, one of its main prerogatives in the EU system. So what this implies, if you agree with that vision of European integration, you should disagree with or disapprove rather the recent evolution of the EU system with the emergence of the national governments and the creeping intergovernmentalism which has been witnessed in recent times. We ran this model in our data set and found out with the conclusion that there was a very substantial pro-community method party. Almost two-thirds of the Commission officials can be described as favoring the community method so defined in our data set. So we asked two sets of questions, basically. First, who are those people? In what can they be said to be different from other Commission officials who would not share their views? What are their respective backgrounds? And B, taking them as a group, what kind of view do they hold as to the role of the Commission? Spare you our hypotheses. I'll mention in passing, in reviewing the findings, which of them have been confirmed or infirmed in the data. The first question we asked was, okay, you have, as I said, a substantial support for the community method in the EU, in the Commission, but how distributed is it among the various country groups? Do British nationals, for instance, tend to think in the same manner as Italian or French or German officials? What made us ask this was our experience with research on European integration, where we do find that irrespective of the fact that you turn to public opinion or to the administrative superstructure, you always find the same things. That is to say, nationalities do matter to a great extent. And the chart which you have on the board shows that it's the case at this level too. We have fairly big variations from one country group to the other. where we find, and this is not a surprise, that, for instance, British officials tend to be less inclined to support the community method than, say, Italian, Dutch, or Slovenian officials. This is interesting, but at the same time, it would be even more interesting to be able to explain those national variations. Why is it that the British tend to be less supportive of the community method? Is it due to education? Is it due to their attitude towards the state? Is it due to their prior experience before they joined the Commission? Is it due to the structure of their beliefs and so on and so forth? The hypotheses one may make are manifold, and we'll try to explore some of these. One of the things we did, for instance, was to try and identify whether successive enlargements of the Union have had any influence whatsoever on support for the community method. And the answer was negative. The answer was negative. I mean, there are variations, but they are not really following any clearly identified patterns. I mean, for instance, returning to the previous slide, you will see that enlargement was expected to have, including by us, to have a strong influence on the beliefs of officials. Well, as it happens, the most pro-community group in our sample is composed of Bulgarians, and the least pro-community method group is composed of Romanians. And the two countries joined the Union exactly at the same time. So it does not seem that this is strongly influenced by the length of a country's stay in the Union. It's not either influenced by the length of the officials in question time in the Commission. We found people who had been in the Commission for 30 years and do not define themselves as supporters of the community method. So it's not a question of socialization within the Commission. This is actually something that confirms an earlier survey that was conducted through interviews 10 or 15 years ago by Elizabeth Hogue in a book that was published at the beginning of this century, if my memory is correct. We also tried to identify whether basically where you stand in the Commission determines your degree of support. Can we identify a clear pattern, for instance, from when you move from one Director General to the other? Is it the case that if you are working in an area where the Commission has stronger powers, you will be more inclined to support the community method? Is it the case that if you work for the Competition Director General, for instance, you will be more supportive than, say, if you work in the Office for Official Publications? Again, there is no clear evidence. There are variations, as you see, from the chart, but the margin of error is so big that we found it impossible to draw any meaningful conclusion from that. It does not seem that where you stand, or at least in which DG you stand, it determines your view on the Commission. Now, of course, this may have to see with the fact that since the Kinnock reform a few years ago, there is a fair degree of mobility within the Commission, so that the fiefdom effect is probably more difficult to take a root in the institution, since people move from one office to the other. Age, as you see, is neither a big factor in determining the degree of support, nor is seniority, that is to say, the level of your job within the Commission. Which There's a slight correlation, but it's not very significant. What is more important, seemingly, is a ideology. People who say that they were moved by their support and their commitment to Europe to join the Commission will, as a rule, identify themselves as supporters of the community method. And what is also important is people's experience before they joined the Commission. It seems that basically the worldview of those people is more influenced by what they did prior to joining the Commission than by what they did after joining the institution. When they get to Brussels, they are maybe not fully trained, but at least their view of the world is fairly well shaped, and it tends not to change all that much while during their stay in the Commission. Ideology is another interesting variable to test. We try to identify whether our supporter group was more left or right-wing than their antagonists, those who do not share their view of the integration process. And the answer is it does not make much of a difference. They are slightly more to the left, as appears on the table on the board. The community method supporters are in dark purple, and you see they're on average slightly more to the left on a 1 to 10 scale, which we had adopted, where 1 was really, we think governments are the most important actors, whereas 10 is we believe markets are able to regulate themselves without much government intervention. Our community method supporters are slightly more to the left than the others, than the other school of thought. They are slightly more liberal than average, but again, it's not terribly significant. It does not seem to make that much of a difference. So much for the, let's say, the variables that may explain the existence of a strong community method support group within the Commission. Let's rapidly move on to the reverse question, that is to say, what views does this group hold on the functioning of the EU? And it's interesting to stress that despite their commitment to a stronger European Union, the view they give of the recent changes in the Union is fairly critical. That is to say, they do not seem to see the world through a fairly rosy lens. They reckon that overall, in the last decade, the Commission has lost influence to the benefit of member states. And they don't connect this either to enlargement or to administrative reform. They're not more critical of the Kinnock reform than officials who do not belong to our community method supporters group. They simply say clearly it's due to political factors, the stronger assertiveness of the governments on the one hand, the weak leadership of the Commission on the other. That's one of the critical part of our survey. Remember, it was done not at the request of the Commission leadership, but with its support. And one of our findings was that Commission officials were pretty disappointed with their leadership. Basically, they tend, of course, they have a remarkable depiction of the Delors period as a golden age where seemingly everything was possible for the Commission. And their assessment of the Santerre and the Prodi Commission was pretty negative. On Barroso, they were mixed, recognizing that in some cases, indeed, when it came to, for instance, defending the institution vis-à-vis other European institutions, he was, let's say, not as bad as either Santerre or Prodi, but clearly behind Delors in their hit parade. That was very clear. What about the future then? These will be my final remarks. You won't be surprised to hear that, on average, Commission officials believe that the powers of the Commission should be strengthened, that the EU should be given more power in specific areas. But what is interesting is that there is not a clear difference between the views of our community method supporters and those of the other officials in the Union. You see, basically, the community method supporters are a bit more centralist than pro-centralization than the others, but it's not a difference that can be described as meaningful in any manner. And finally, when it comes to the question I referred to earlier on, that is to say, do you support the idea that the Commission should become the government of Europe? You find that even among supporters of self-defined supporters of the community method, there is not an altogether support for that view. It does, of course, there is here a striking difference between supporters of the community method and their antagonists. This is, of course, not surprising, because though we did not use that question as an element to define our population, you could expect that if you are pro-community method, you will, let's say, look with a benevolent eye at the idea of the Commission gaining more powers. But even among that group, there is not an unqualified support for the idea of the Commission becoming basically the government of Europe. And that, I think, is interesting, because it suggests that they have a fairly subtle view of, let's say, governance in the European Union. They do not say that this is just a replication of what we have witnessed at the nation-state level with the emergence of strong executives. No, they say we need some kind of regulatory structure that should organize the working and the cooperation between member countries, but not necessarily become their hierarchical, let's say, a kind of hierarchical authority over national governments. And similarly, that's an equally interesting finding, I think, when asked about their willingness to share the Commission's right of initiative with the European Parliament, they tend to be fairly supportive. They said, well, it's not a bad idea, a majority of them said. It's not that, again, there was all, let's say, unqualified support for this view, but they are not opposed to the idea that the Commission would relinquish part of its political power by recognizing that the Parliament should have a right of initiative of its own. So it goes in the same direction, according to me, as the previous finding. That is to say, they do not view themselves as, you know, the supreme authority in the European Union. Okay. what, to conclude, what can one derive from this little excursion in the minds of Commission officials? Few things. First, you might say that many of our findings are, in a way, unsurprising. It's not much of a surprise to find out that there is support for, let's say, the central role of the Commission among Commission officials. At the same time, remember that this survey was conducted at a time which was particularly difficult for the Commission. After the enlargement, after administrative reform, after a number of important challenges to the Commission's leadership in the EU. So we could perfectly have, I personally would not have been surprised to find out that there was, let's say, a tendency to regard the community method as a thing of the past, as many national leaders have been advocating in recent times. It's not the case. You do still find within the rank and file of the Commission a very substantial party that supports the community method. At the same time, those people are not happy. They're fairly critical of the contemporary evolution of European Union governance. They're fairly critical of the greater part which is now taken, not so much by the European Parliament. They recognize that the Parliament brings something that is very important to the Union, which is electoral legitimacy. They're not happy with the stronger role of national government. They're willing, indeed, they favor a greater degree of centralization. But as I said, it's not that they want to become the government of Europe. They reckon that this is a view which is probably out of reach for the time being, and perhaps maybe not even desirable in its own right, which is something we may return to in the discussion. What this suggests is that there is within the Commission bureaucracy a readiness to accept that the Commission should play more of a role. If, in other words, another leadership would emerge that would ask them to be, let's say, less risk adverse and to expose themselves, it seems that, on the basis of the evidence we have gathered, they would welcome this change. As you know, this is not the case. The current leadership, Mr. Barroso has made it very clear and be quite open in that respect that he does not want to challenge the authority and the leadership of national governments. He says it's helpless. We won't reach any results by doing so. His officials seem to be less risk adverse than he is himself. That's an interesting finding. And of course, he declined to comment on that part of the survey, as you may imagine.
Let me briefly present, give an outline of what I'm going to discuss today. I will actually take on board the suggestion of Professor Fabbrini, and I will try to introduce, even if very briefly, what are the main changes foreseen by the Lisbon Treaty. This is because basically one of my main arguments is that it is impossible to locate any institutional actors without taking into account the dynamics which basically are established with other institutional actors. Then I will focus and try to depict the role of the commissions and other executive actors through our simplified model of policy cycle, which is composed by the stage of political initiative, the stage of policy formulation, decision-making, and implementation. I will then offer some preliminary interpretations of the changing role of the commissions in highlighting the importance of looking not only at formal division of competences, but also looking at informal sources of influence. Then I will sketch some preliminary conclusions. So if we want to be, for the sake of brevity, explain in 2 words the way in which the Lisbon Treaty pursued a reorganization of the overall framework to deal with external affairs, we basically could cut off the picture to 2 main elements. The first one is that despite the rhetoric on depillarization, there are still 2 divided foreign policy methods governing the making of foreign policies. On the one hand, traditional high politics fields of cooperations that remain under the hands of member state intergovernmental cooperation, although with the interventions of some institutional actors. On the other hand, we have got, as was just mentioned, a more community method-oriented sectors of cooperations that in general regard, let's say, so-called low policy competencies such as trade or development and so forth. On the other hand, the Lisbon Treaty basically gave rise to a massive process of institutional arrangements involving all executive actors at the European level. Therefore, we have got a far stronger European Council with a permanent president. We have got a reorganization of the Council of the European Union, whereas the General Affairs Council is now separated by the Foreign Affairs Council, and they are respectively chaired by the rotating presidency and the new figure of High Representative Vice Presidents of the Commission. We have then for the creation of a quasi-foreign ministry to deal with external affairs, the European External Action Service, as all of you know, together and alongside, let's say, specialized sectoral ministries which are still basically managed by the Commission. What is my main argument in this overall picture? In a way, the system added on further complexity in the management of foreign policy dossiers in order to make up these ambivalent situations in which competences remained unaltered, but still some attempt needed to be done in order to, let's say, guarantee cross-fertilization between policy fields, but also coherence, consistency of the approach. The new system, although there are obviously some guidelines on how to pursue coordinations, cannot work if coordination is not into place, meaning that no actor, as we will see, can play solo in order to guarantee policy outcomes. Basically, therefore, what I think is important in this moment of the evolution of the overall framework is to look at each specific field of cooperation and see how concretely actors interact in order to understand what is the new balance of power within among institutions. Therefore, very few generalization can be done as far as the role of any single institution is located at the moment. Now I will be extremely brief, but I do promise that whatever kind of questions you want to raise, I will be more than keen to answer during our Q&A sessions, but also to give some more empirical example. Now everything looks a little bit vague. At the stage of initiative, the power of initiative is scattered among 4 different executive actors. On the one hand, we've got a stronger European Council that basically has got an enhanced role of steering in all the sectors concerning foreign-related policy making. Therefore, not only traditional second pillar, but also more first pillar-oriented kind of competencies. We still have got the power of initiative and above all the role of agenda setter of the rotating presidency, which is still there within the Council, as we will see when we are going to see the slide on decision making. We have got the High Representative together with the EAS that has the precise mandate of presenting initiatives, suggesting initiatives in foreign policy matters, and the commissions that still hold not only the bulk of the initiative in external actions matters, but also basically all portfolios of internal competencies that have got an external reflex. One case for all is environment, which is an extremely important policy field that has got obviously great impact at the international political level. Both the meshed character of policy dossiers, it's very difficult that the wall of ministries or DGs or institutions are able to contain the nature, the concrete nature of a policy measures. In general, policy do not correspond to the wall of ministries, either at the national level. Therefore, both these aspects, the complexity and increasing complexity of policies to be dealt with at the international level, but also the very loose formal structure for coordination makes that no single actor can, at this stage, ignore other actors when presenting an initiative. Because as we are going to see in a second, basically other actors are empowered at the latter stage of the policy process. Therefore, if an actor, let's say the Commission, wants to push forward an initiative, needs to be sure that all other actors are on board. Otherwise, the policy measures will be stuck in a successive stage. At the level of formulations, theoretically, the situation is fairly simple. We have got the EIS that presents policy proposals in foreign policy matters. On the other, we have got the commissions that prepare policy proposal in its own field of competencies. As we just mentioned, as with the difficulty of disentangling high and low policy components during the foreign policy field, a given measure percolates from all Commission service, between Commission service and the EIS before being presented at the Council for decisions. Therefore, if there is some formal arrangement, which by the way is extremely loose still at this stage, informality and informal sources of authority are actually giving the sense of how the system works in practice. Who has got more know-how? Who has got more information? Who is in the ES but previously was in the Commission and knows a couple of telephone numbers of colleagues that are keen to open a gate instead of retaining information, is the one that is guaranteeing a more viable policy option. This messy picture basically demonstrates, but it's not my fault, I promise, that the pillar structure is still there. You may see very clearly the line that defines foreign policy competencies, which is basically chaired by the High Representative and the EIS, and the line that basically describes former third pillar competencies, which at the moment is chaired by the rotating presidency. So, as I was mentioning, the rotating presidency is still there. Is it a better organized system? In reality, at the moment, it seems it's not, or at least in this long transitional stage, it seems that the system makes a lot for organizational mismatch. Let me give you an example. These working groups, CFSP working group, are in general geographical working group, which means working groups that deals for the Maghreb Mashrek, you know, with Arab Spring, the European Union needed to give an immediate response. So the strategic, let's say, the strategic address, the strategic impulse for this kind of initiative within the Council was given in this line. But however, concrete measures to be adopted very often are taken in that line of decision making under, for instance, the trade working group rather than the development. If we take the example of sanctions, we will go to the RELEX counselors and so forth and so on. Therefore, even here, informality makes the difference. For a long period, first of all, the Commission was not in CFSP working group. And then, as far as I know from interviews, it was a question of the member states to reintegrate the Commission, because working without the Commission was impossible in those working groups. We can go more into details if you want to have details about how it works, but basically, there are some working groups that are closing up, and this is the notable case of trade, if we want to talk about empirical example, and retaining information, and there are commission service and EAS units that are starting to collaborate in order to push things forward at the level of decision. The situation is not much more simple at the level of implementation. The system indeed, despite, as I said, of formal competencies, established a double line of authority and of responsibility at the institutional level. On the one hand, we have got the EAS and above all Lady Ashton, the High Representative, who are political, accountable and responsible for foreign policy initiative. On the other hand, the only budgetary authority at the European level, at the institutional level in the European Union, is and remains the European Commission. Therefore, we do have a double line of responsibility, whereas political responsibility is in the hand of the EAS, and financial responsibility is in the hand of the European Commission. To make up this very awkward situation, a new body, and this is an extremely interesting topic for master thesis or PhD thesis, must say, is the creation of the foreign policy instrument. The EIS is not the only hybrid body created by the Lisbon Treaty. It has got the same hybrid character, whereas it is organically part of the Commission, because it needs to be financially accountable and responsible, but is functionally part of the EIS, which basically explains its kind of strange role, but also its physical location in the same building of the EIS. So the way in which this body will basically develop a known sense of belonging and organizational ethos is really a matter of empirical observation right now. We can see once more that also at this stage, concurrent and partially overlapping competencies pave the way for conflicts, competing conditions, and potential policy misfit. Now let's see very, very briefly how other scholars basically described or intended the role of the commissions in the new structure. In an analysis based on these indicators, Monar, in an article of 2010, suggested that the commissions is the overall big loser of the process of reforms. Mainly, those who gain more influence are the European Parliament and the European Council, while the Council of the European Minister, basically, in the overall policy spectrum, remained unaltered. On a Monar 2010. In a more external relations-oriented article, Nugent and Renaud proposed, first of all, a framework with indicators as applied in all different foreign policy fields. And in general, they came on the same conclusions, that basically the Commission, nearly in all policy sectors, external policy sectors, is losing power, power and influence in the policy process. What I suggest, although it's extremely difficult to deny this situation from a point of view, is kind of understanding how, in reality, the same concept of power or responsibility is more and more porous. We need to look concretely on how institutions develop. It's time, in my opinion, to go back to old foreign policy analysis paradigms like bureaucratic politics, for instance, in order to understand in reality and in concrete interaction how the system is going to produce outcome and who is going to gain influence. Therefore, to conclude, yes, the Commission lost power in the new structure. However, we cannot neglect that there are important sources, informal sources of influence that need to be taken into account. In that regard, the commissions that was there before and is there now and is here to stay has got, at this stage, a comparative advantage. Basically, the Commission, more or less explicitly, but above all effectively, basically was able to decide the bulk of the organizational culture and organizational routines and ethos of the new EIS service, because the bulk of the of the EIS officials are former officials of the European Commission. Although I agree very much with the fact that this does not tell us about their perception, but this tells us for sure about their organizational routine. And if you talk within the EIS that was immediately pressured to start acting took what he had, which is the working habit of the European Commission. Not only this, both the commissions knows many of the members already of the EIS. It was a long transitional stage in which there was much of confusions. People within the EIS didn't have computers. It took a long time to have really a working system. But the Commission has got the comparative advantage of taking the phone and knowing previous colleagues. And this basically represented a big sources of influence. To conclude, is there a durable source of influence? Well, not really. One of the problems with the new arrangement is that the idea of merging together civil servants from the Council Secretariat and the commissions within the EIS and diplomats of the member states is not an eternal solution. Basically because there's no one else to include anymore within the commissions. And this is basically explained also by the fact that EPSO, which is the official recruiting system, already started to recruit. So what is the new balance? How the ES will evolve at the expenses or in favor of the Commission is still very much to see, as with concrete dynamic of interaction. Thank you.
I would like to thank you, Professor Fabbrini, for inviting me here in Rome. I spent several years in Italy, and I always felt I left a piece of my heart there. So it's with very great pleasure that I'm here for a few days again. We've been witnessing, especially since the start of the financial crisis, we've been witnessing very deep changes at the European level, and many observers, including the professor here in this room, have noticed a shift away of power from the Commission, from the European Parliament, in favor of the European Council, and or the most powerful members, if not member, of the European Council. And I would like to give a bit, to give you a bit of perspective on this shift, using two other examples, and to give you some theories which, in my belief, have proven to be useful to understand shifts of power in the past, and might be useful to understand the one which are that we are witnessing today. The theory which I would like to present you very briefly can be called the institutionalist bargaining theory. It's been developed by Knight in 1992 and used again by Farrell and Héritier in a special issue in West European politics by Joseph Jupil and others. And there are three fundamental points to summarize this theory. The first point is that institutions are competence maximizers, so that every actor, Commission, Parliament, and Council of Ministers, for example, they would like to have the maximum competencies as they could. And they just presented some support or qualified support for this idea. But the idea is basically that every actor will try to influence to maximize its influence on every piece of legislation, and in order to be more influential, it needs to have more competencies. So every actor prefers to have more power than less power. Obviously, institutional actors, European actors, cannot do what they want. There are rules, and their rules come from the treaties. And that's member states who draft the treaties and decide who does what and how. But, and that's the second point of this theory, these treaties are always or often incomplete. You cannot specify everything all the time. So they can be seen as incomplete contracts with some holes and with some room of maneuver to to act. Okay, and so first point, actors are competence maximizer. Second, treaties and rules are somehow incomplete. And third, within this limbo, within this space, you will see a battle of power, a big bargaining between institutional actors. And everyone will try to maximize its power and to stretch the treaties to the limit to win. And the winner will be the actor which will have more resources. And here, all the business theory is useful. Which resources might be useful to win a fight? Time horizon, when you're pressed by time, you're less vulnerable. Existing formal powers, legitimacy, etc., etc. And in this battle, the European Parliament is very powerful. It's less vulnerable to time, less vulnerable to policy failures. It gets more legitimacy often than the Commission, for example. So when you look at institutional change in Europe, what you observe is that the European Parliament is often the big winner, okay? And that it will act and bargain and do everything it can do not to lose. And to convince you that I'm right, I'm going to give you two examples, which speak a lot and give nice illustration of this theory. The first one is the hearings of commissioners that take place every time that you have a new commission, and the second one is comitology, or delegation of legislative power to the commission. Yeah. Yes, all right. And then I would like to tell you how these examples speak to what we're seeing now, this new economic governance and the loss of power and shift of powers I just mentioned. So, you know, all of you know that every time that you have a new commission now, every commissioner has to present himself or herself in front of the European Parliament, and nobody, I can swear, takes it for granted. They prepare themselves very well. They want to convince the European Parliament. They're very stressed, and if they don't do it well, they will dismiss. It happens with the Barroso II Commission. With the Bulgarian commissioner, we couldn't convince the European Parliament about her integrity and knowledge about the subject, so she was immediately replaced. We remember all as well what happened with Buttiglione. We couldn't convince part of the European Parliament and finally was replaced too. So the European Parliament has a de facto say about individual commissioners. The question, when you look at the story of it's very puzzling, because no one in the Commission and almost no one in the European Council was in favor of that practice. It all happens with an European civil servant, so not even a member of Parliament, Michael Shackleton. We say to the European Parliament, look, I have an idea. Just after 92, there is the Maastricht Treaty, and the Commission is subject to a vote of approval collectively. He said, I have an idea. Why don't we do as they do in the States? We ask every commissioner to come, and they present themselves, and we try to check whether they're good enough. And the answer from both sides, Commission and European Council, was a categorical no. Delors wrote a letter that I could see in my hand saying, it's an heresy. We're not going to do that. It's a collective investiture, not an individual investiture. Member states wrote a letter saying, well, we're not going to do that. You take us as a package or not. And then the European Parliament answered and wrote a letter saying, okay, we wait. So unless you present yourself individually in front of us, we're not going to vote. And we have time. And so the commissioner were obviously not in such a luxury position and wanted to take hope and start working, finally compliant. And then you have a creation of a wall in favor of the European Parliament because he could bargain very well. even if you didn't have, even if the Commission and the European Council were opposing it. Another example I want to give you, but I don't know to. Can I go? Oh, sorry. Okay. It's about comitology. I don't know if you heard about comitology or never. You do know what it means. It's for those who don't, because some say no. Very rapidly, the competence of implementing legislation, it's in the hands of member states, according to the treaties. They couldn't do it all, so they delegated to the Commission. They asked the Commission to execute legislation, and they created committees of member states to supervise the Commission, and that gave the name to comitology. And that has been the subject of a very, very long battle with the European Parliament, and especially since the Maastricht Treaty. Why? Why do you think that the European Parliament had a problem with that? I mean, the reasoning of the European Parliament was the following. They were saying, we don't care if the Commission sees details. If the Commission is deciding how many centimeters must a window have, or how many grams such a liquid must have to protect the consumer, we're fine. We can do it. We can let it to the member state. We don't care. Our problem, they say, is when the Commission is doing legislation. Okay? The equivalent would be the legge delega in Italy. So when the Parliament is too busy, it doesn't have time to, or he wants legislation, so he votes a legge delega to the Italian government, say, okay, in education, you can do that. So the problem with the Parliament with that is that if we delegate important legislative power to the Commission, we want to control as much as the member state do what the Commission does. And in the past system, it was not possible. So when the European Parliament delegates as a legislator to the Commission, it was done forever. So it's been the European Parliament really battled to be able to supervise the Commission, and he managed. With the Treaty of Lisbon, you know, for the first time, have a difference between two types of delegation. The implementing acts about details left to the Commission alone, and delegated acts, it's about important stuff, it's legislation, so it should be controlled by both legislators, so Council and European Parliament. And to illustrate this institutional bargain, I'm going to show you two graphs. Here, in the black line, continuous line, you have the percentage of delegation proposals. So amongst all the proposals for legislation set up by the Commission, the percentage that delegates legislation to itself. And you can see an extraordinary, since the 90s to now, an extraordinary increase. So now, almost all, 80% of proposals, legislative proposals, delegates. So delegation is really important on the European Union level. Second point, you have a big increase in 99. And I remember I was starting with Adrienne at this graph and saying, what happened in 99? It's all this increase. What could explain that? And then yes, you had a reform of the comitology decision that increased the power of the Commission. So the Commission, once the rules has been changed in a way that increases our power in delegation, was suddenly very in favor of using delegation. And I spoke to people in the Commission who confirmed me that and say, the moment you change a rule and the moment you increase the competence of an actor, then he gets suddenly very interested in this rule. And he was saying, the person I was interviewing was explaining to me, and especially at the very beginning, you have a political battle over the choice of a rule. It's not, and after time it starts to be more legal, but after you increase the competence of an actor, you have a political battles. And since the Lisbon Treaty, since you have no position of the European Parliament, you had another increase. So delegation is a reality, and it's been increasing in time. The second graph I want to show you, so in blue, you have the percentage in first readings of times that the Commission, that the European Parliament say, it's enough, we delegate too much to the Commission, we're not going to do that in that scope. And it was really a strategy. So the member of the Committee of Constitutional Affairs meet and wrote a letter to all members of Parliament and say, we warn the Commission, unless we get power in comitology, we will oppose systematically piece of legislation after piece of legislation, every delegation, unless we get what we want, which is to be able to supervise the Commission. And in 2006, you have a reform, a kind of ceasefire, so a big decrease. And in 2008, so after the Lisbon Treaty, which introduced these differences, the opposition came back to zero. I couldn't find a file in which you had opposition from the European Parliament. So a battle we started in the 90s and which converged almost 20 years after into a solution which was satisfactory for the European Parliament. So why I am telling you that and why I am giving you these examples, why it is interesting for now, it's because my point explaining you that is that you have to look at the picture in a longer term. Okay? And what we're certainly assisting now with the austerity measures and the role of the European Council in defining the deficit, how to reduce deficit, you have a loss of power from the national parliament. The European Parliament seems a bit marginalized, Commission very marginalized as well, and Germany and France with a very strong role. So my expectation is that the European Parliament, not now, because it's reasonable and it might understand that you need to act rapidly, but in a more longer term, what we're going to assist is the European Parliament fighting to win back this power in economic governance, which was taken away from the national parliaments and from the Commission, and try and elaborate a strategy to have his voice more powerful and bargain and even make everything which is in its power to win. And my expectation is that it will win again.
Let me just summarize the point that I consider crucial, at least for the students of these three presentations. So the presentation was about the Commission, assuming the Commission as the crucial institution of the process of European integration as we knew it. Okay, so Europe has been done roughly by the Commission. The Commission was this incredible institutional invention of setting up a supranational body not controlled by the government, competitive with the government, not dependent on the government, able to produce autonomous policy thought that the government in a certain way had to accept. And the government, so far, till the Lisbon Treaty, let's say, accepted this role of the Commission. The Commission was crucial for making the transaction cost between the various sectors, the national government, low or lower. You needed an actor which could play the role of guaranteeing all the bargaining partner in order to comply with the decision taken by the former. So this is the picture. In that picture, we, let's say, develop a theory that Europe has been possible thanks to the community method. The community method is a method, say, of course, there is no, it's not written in the treaties, but is a method through which we recognize to the Commission the power of policy initiative. And this power of policy initiative comes from the fact that the Commission is the only one with the European perspective, with the European view. Okay, so it is up to the Commission to define the priority, the agenda, the question that Europe should face and should solve in order to move on in the integration. So this is, all those who were in favor of the integration process were with the Commission, okay? Those who were against were with the goal, the empty chair. What do they want? No, we are the real true power holders. So why those bureaucrats, those technocrats? You go to London, you find this myth that in Brussels there are bureaucrats, technocrats, well paid, too much paid, with our taxes, and they think European. That is very dangerous. Okay? And that is the two line. Okay, finally we arrived to the Lisbon Treaty. So we discuss in our classroom about the Lisbon Treaty. We have the idea that in the Lisbon Treaty there is also another method, but that method of decision-making, let's say another decision-making regime, was under-considered, was not considered to be so important. It is the intergovernmental method used for foreign policy, security policies, but also for financial policy. Then arrived the crisis. Then arrived the Euro crisis. And the Euro crisis emphasized, overstress the intergovernmental method, because there in the Euro crisis there is not the community method, which is more for the common market, single market. There in the Euro crisis, in the financial issue, those who want to hold power are the governments, okay? And indeed, the Lisbon Treaty opened a new perspective. It says there is another important institution that we call European Council, which always existed, at least since 1973, when Giscard d'Estaing decided to have this informal gathering of head of states and government. Now we recognize the European Council as a formal institution representing the head of states and government with the power to define the strategy of the Union. But then when they started to deal with the crisis, they didn't stop to discuss strategies. They entered in details. They said, we want a six-pack. We want to deal with the crisis in this way. And more, they enter in policy making, not just in defining strategy. And the Commission, probably also because it was led, and it is led by a shy and, let's say, not undeclared intergovernmental president, I don't know how to call it, but anyway, the Commission gradually accepted to become the technocratic hand of the European Council. Okay, so this is the picture. Is this development dangerous for European integration? Or this development in some way is a fact of life, that more you move in sensitive direction in the European integration, like foreign policy, Caterina, like financial policy, the discussion of Catherine, more you move in that direction, the government say, no, this is too much sensitive. This is a question that they want to deal with, okay? But if they deal with, they are not able to solve, because then you take a decision, and we have the Stability and Growth Pact, and in 2004, 2005, two very powerful governments, French and German government, with the support of the Italian government of the period, decided not to respect the pact. Then arrived Greece. The Greek government didn't respect the pact, but the Greek government didn't respect the pact after the French and German government, right? Don't forget that, because now we are very tough with the Greeks, but we would have been tough also with the French and the German government in 2004 to 2005, who call into question the compliance mechanism, okay? So what happened? So the very important Renaud contribution is to show us the mind of the Commission. So they went within the Commission, they made interview, they tried to understand the collective mind of the Commission. The conclusion is up to question what I perceive from this conclusion of this very important. This is an example of what does it mean to make social science, that you base your idea on facts, on knowledge of empirical facts, not on normative theory that you like. And what happened from these facts is that basically the Commission is a very conservative body. Say, we would like to be the Commission, we don't want to be the government. Nevertheless, we are a little bit preoccupied by the growing power of the European Council. So the facts say to us that the Commission is a sort of, is trapped within this, say, contradictory pressure. From one side, they are realists. They say, we cannot be the government, because if we become the government of Europe, we become too much politicized. And if we become too much politicized, probably we miss this supranational, neutral role in promoting policy change. But to the other end, the other institution, the Parliament, as Catherine showed us, the Council, are becoming more and more powerful. So what do we think of this transformation? Because this is a real huge, dramatic, to a certain extent, transformation. So those who are in favor of federalism say this transformation is against integration. We have to call back the role of the Commission. We have to connect the Commission with the Parliament. And we have to transform the Parliament in the source of legitimacy of the Commission. The others say, no, we are intergovernmental, we want more and more power of the European Council, but they cannot resolve with the European Council the question that we know. For example, more and more the crisis develop, and more the European Council asks the Commission to give not only technical advice, but to play a more and more important role in keeping control of the government which do not respect the criteria established in the negotiation. So we are in the middle. And this middle, we in some way decide the future of Europe for the next generation. So this is why I thank my students and my friend Renaud. They are friends as well now. Anyway, because this is a discussion that we should keep in our mind. I am impressed by the fact that this discussion is open in Germany. The people around Angela Merkel are discussing about the future, and this discussion is very, limited and low in a country like Italy. So this is some way of contributing to this discussion.
I agree with everything that's been said, and it's a big amount of research, and very impressed by this, and it was a good opportunity to listen to you, and thanks you so much from me. I was wondering, I was trying to ask to you, who is the enemy, the main enemy of the Commission? And something has been already said, and I think an answer could be given with regards to the right of initiative. And in this case, the dangers come from the European Parliament. We have the power to request the Commission to submit a proposal. It comes from the national parliaments. We have the early warning mechanism and on the principle of subsidiarity. We have the citizens. We have the European Citizen Initiatives. And lastly, we have the European Council. I'm asking to you if I'm thinking that maybe the Commission is managing to control all the other institutions. The first three subjects I've called the European Parliament. The national parliaments is really impressive how the Commission has managed through the political dialogue to use national parliaments as a form of legitimacy of its own decision, its own proposals. And also the European Citizen Initiative, no one knows, of course, but it doesn't seem so a big danger for the power of initiative of the Commission. Whereas the European Council, was, what Sergio was saying right before me shows that it's the real danger and the real enemy for the rights of initiative. I'm asking to you if it's something that could be generalized or not, just this.
The growing role of the European Council as the input institution jeopardize or might strengthen in the middle run the community method. So the community method is based on the idea that the Commission is the source of policy initiative, and starting from the Commission is a guarantee that the proposals submitted to the Council of Ministers to the European Parliament come from a European perspective. Now we move in very sensitive policy issue. It is a constraint to have the European Council as informal initiator or informal let's say actor helping the Commission to define the agenda, or is not. So in a way, can the community method, in your view, as one of the most important specialists of the community method, is just publish, edit a book that students are using in the course, can the community method be readapted or not to the role of the European Council? Caterina, the European External Action Service has been, hailed and welcomed as finally the occasion to have a European diplomatic culture, a European diplomatic bodies. Finally, we had something there which is not the sum of national government diplomats. Okay. In the same moment, the European External Action Service, both in its composition and in the leadership, let's say, in the political official of the European External Action Service, still we have an important role of the main national government. So if you look, as some of us did, the distribution of roles, of offices, you find, probably is by chance, that certain country has much more influence than other. I do understand that France and Britain has a long diplomatic tradition. They are very serious foreign policy establishment. So it is clear that they have an advantage vis-à-vis Malta or vis-à-vis Cyprus or vis-à-vis other small, medium-sized states. But the fact that the European External Action Service is going to be, you can say, strongly affected by the powerful country can have a negative effect on the capacity of Europe to produce a supranational European corp. And moreover, of course, I would like to ask, where is Lady Ashton? Is she still in office? I mean, so I don't know exactly. So what do you think? Is a question of personality? Is a question that the British were successful in imposing an officer without any knowledge and experience, or is a question of office? The complexity to be vice president and then president of the Foreign Affairs Council, to be intergovernmental, to be community in the same moment. How many hats you can put in your head? Okay. Catherine, so you said that the Parliament is going to play let's say the most prominent role. In a way, the Parliament has its own atomic bomb called legitimacy. Okay, it can always stand up, say, "Look, boys or girls, I am the only one with electoral legitimacy." Okay, and that was very powerful. They used very, very well. But this kind of power, why do you think should be addressed, should be, or for which perspective should be utilized? The Parliament should utilize this power for claiming the capacity to control the Commission and to arrive to the point to form the Commission, or at least to control politically the Commission, or the power of the Parliament should be utilized for balancing the European Council role, where you enter in the cave of the monster, let's say, where the Parliament never dare to go there. And is the Parliament, in your opinion, in the perspective, in the culture, to call the cards with the European Council, say, okay, you are the most important institution, well, I will be your counter institution. I don't care too much about forming the commission. I care on the fact that they want to control what you are doing. Sorry for these 3 questions, but at this point, the arrival of Melina De Caro, ciao Melina, give you 2 minutes and 30 seconds each for the answer, okay? We start with Catherine, Caterina, and then Renaud.
Thank you very much for your question. Eduardo, there are 2 other theories that try to explain the shifts of power. I mean, the most 2 other important of them. One is the classical intergovernmentalist theory, says there is a shift of power when member states want it, and nothing else happened. And I think it's not very convincing to explain what we saw. The other one is the legitimacy questions. They say, European Parliament, Riedberger, for example, says, rightly, a European Parliament has been empowered to compensate for the loss of power of national parliaments. So every time that you move, that you leave something out of the reach of national parliaments, for example, unanimity to qualified majority voting, then you have to compensate. And I think it's this argument explains well why some member states were strongly, because you always have in the Council, in the European Council, a group of countries very much in favor of empowering the European Parliament, and another group which is against. And obviously this legitimacy argument that we should compensate is very effective. But I think that the part that we manage with the theory is explaining is that very often the European Parliament fights for itself, so it makes it easier for pro-European EP to change the treaty in a way that favors the European Parliament. And sometimes it's just because member states want it, so I don't pretend our theory explains everything. That I think there are alternative explanations that sometimes doesn't manage to explain well the shifts, or partially only the shifts. About the role that the European Parliament should have, what I would like to see, and I don't think it will happen soon, but and I don't think many people agree with me, but what I would like to see is instead of having a European Parliament that has been discussed, proposing candidates for President of the Commission, what I would like to see is at the election, European groups from the European Parliament presenting candidates for President of the European Council. So to answer your question, I think that that's not going to happen in the near future if it ever happens. But I more see the European Parliament, it could be useful in balancing the role of the European Council.
Very good. You're set? Okay. Caterina?
Yes, I'm good.
Thanks for the questions, and I will try to be very brief, starting for the last one, leadership, Lady Ashton. I believe it's a matter of personality, and it was obviously a clear choice not to take a person with previous experience in this kind of field. So someone also commented that this was done to kill foreign policy at the European level. It's a matter of tasks, and there I definitely add the 4th act, for which we should also wait to judge effectively Lady Ashton, even if, in my opinion, she was very bad in isolating herself. But the 4th act was setting up the system while, in parallel, being ready to act when nothing was there. But not only within the European External Action Service. I made the example. The computers were of the Commission. So, a new institutional body, civil servants went to job, they couldn't access the computers. They were cut out from. So yes, probably she was not the best person, but it's also a matter of propaganda, simply highlight how bad she was. And then I believe that from an organizational point of view, and then the second point you raised, the office, she was not particularly, I'm thinking some diplomatic terms but she was not particularly smart in liaising with the Commission. She was basically so scared of being attacked from all fronts that she didn't take on board the commissions in order to see how to structure the service. And this would have guaranteed, in second instance, more support for the role, when it was more, I mean, at least vis-à-vis the member states. So I want to be brief. So the colonization of behalf of big member states. Two aspects on this that I would like to raise. First of all, is an old issue. It makes me. It reminds me of the creation of DG8. Now it's DG DevCo. Before it was DG Dev, when basically the French officers, after the creation of the Fed, that was basically destined to European colonies. The French government of the time took the Col Français, took Jean Ferrandi, put it in DG DevCo, expecting basically to have a perfect agent, the most loyal of the agents. What happened is that that was the step, and that was the actor precisely, that changed totally the physiognomy of DG development and started to give a strong sense of institutionalization that carry on till nowadays. So lots of room for unintended consequences. And this is something that I very much look at and see at when I interview EAS members. They are all frustrated. They are all sad, and they're more and more willing to exert a role. After all, for them, their institutional affiliation is part of their identity. They want things to work, and they are exasperated. So, yeah, there's a wait-and-see moment. Just for closing up, a provocation. On the one hand, we need to decide where we want to be good and evil, because we cannot be good and evil all over. So, yes, colonization from big member states. But it's not only a matter of balance. My question, or size of the member states. If a member state, let's say Latvia, in this case, a small and newly acceded member state, has got this in his own foreign ministry, a department to deal with Maghreb Mashrek of 2 people, should it be represented? What is the leverage that it adds to the European Union? Where we want to be evil, outside the European Union or inside the European Union? In there, probably we should all of hoping that the member states have got a little bit of wisdom not to claim things that they cannot do. And the example was exactly on a geographical desk and wouldn't be on Russia, obviously. So thanks.
Very good. Very good. Renaud.
Okay, 3 quick remarks. Since we have to close first on multivariate analysis, I excluded it from my talk because indeed there would be little time to go into the details, but we did a number of those actually, and they revealed a number of interesting things, such as, for instance, the most interesting I think was the one we did in relation to that graph you may remember, where we looked at the distribution of support for the community method per nationality. And we did a multivariate analysis trying to understand what was behind nationality. If it was, let's say, the level of GDP, the small versus large member state divide. And actually we found out that one of the variables that seems to had most influence was the Catholic versus Protestant countries divide. Indeed, Protestant countries tend to produce less supporters of the community method, which we need a new Max Weber to explain, I suppose. But you see that this is the kind of discussion which was so much beyond the scope of this session that I did not want to go into that, even though it's actually really interesting. But I really recommend that you have a look at the book when it comes out in September of this year. You'll see a number of things that can be regarded as interesting puzzles for further research. Now, I like very much your question about where is the enemy, because I think it's a good way. Of course, it's a binary question, but it's a good way to address today's problem, to identify where the most problems may come from from the Commission. At the same time, it's important to stress that the system is premised on the idea that indeed there is no enemy. You may have countervailing forces in various places, but the European Council was not established in order to oppose whatever the Commission would do. It was, on the contrary, established in order to, let's say, inject more political muscle into the system. Maybe it's injected too much of national muscle at the same time. But after all, the concept of the European Council was not Giscard d'Estaing, even though he was, let's say, the leader who proposed its formalization. The architect behind this institution is Jean Monnet, because he recognized that it was important to, let's say, enroll heads of state and governments in the functioning of the Union. But no matter how you look at the European Council, even the mighty European Council of today cannot work on its own. I mean, Van Rompuy is said to step on Barroso's toes, and he's done so on a number of occasions, important ones with that. But at the end of the day, he can't run the show on a daily basis, if only because he has a private office of 23 persons, whereas Barroso is the leader of an institution of 23,000 people, which of course gives him a little ammunition if he wants to use it, of course. And this brings me to my final conclusion, which is an echo of the discussion we had this afternoon. What we've seen is that institutions do matter, and here I would say one word for the sake of justice in defense of Lady Ashton, I mean, who's constantly criticized. But I think if you, judging from the slide that was presented by Caterina, even Superman appointed as high representative for foreign policy would not have managed to overcome this complexity. I would argue that the office was created in such a way that it is impossible to have an efficiently organized foreign policy. Full stop. Even Tony Blair, superhero of all superheroes, would not have managed to do it. He would have managed to antagonize a number of important officials in a number of countries. That's sure. But I'm not sure at all that the EU would have fared better and that it would be, have been endowed with a stronger foreign policy. So, yes, people may make a difference, but institutions, of course, do matter, and even superheroes would find it difficult to run some of the complex offices that have been established, even when we were told that this was meant to simplify the working of the Union. But if you really want to simplify things, I think there's room for improvement, and I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. So